Hello and welcome to the Ice Cream for Everyone podcast. This is the official second episode of the Ice Cream for Everyone podcast. Very, very excited today. We recorded an episode with my friend Julien, with whom I participate in a French podcast about role-playing games, Les Voix. And we interviewed one of my favorite game designers. John Wick was generous enough with his time to join us for this podcast. He is a longtime game designer and writer. He designed over 30 different games. He's participated in collectible card games, role-playing games. He's won the Origins Award for outstanding work in the games industry for two different games at least. One called Legend of the Five Rings, which is a game where you play samurai. And there's a card game and a role-playing game attached to that. And another game, which is one of my all-time favorite, called 7th Sea. And 7th Sea happens, we talk about it during the podcast and during the episode, but it's a game taking place in a fictional fantasy restoration 17th century Europe full of pirates and musketeers and sorcery and politics, and very exciting. And in this episode, it's a fantastic conversation we have with John. He talks about his creative process. He talks about the way he writes and what inspires him. We talk about many different movies and books that he pulled inspiration from, talk about stories and storytelling and how games are useful and what we learn from them and how they work. So without further ado, here is the Ice Cream for Everyone podcast and John Wick. So, John, thank you very, very much for joining me. This is the Ice Cream for Everyone podcast, and Julien asked to join as well. So, Julien has a podcast in French about role-playing games that I participate in. Do you want to introduce yourself quickly, Julien?
Yeah, I'm a teacher, and I'm really interested in podcasts. I listen to many podcasts in French and in English. So, I'm really honored to be here with John, because when I thought about the game designers I like and I admire, meeting John here is like meeting Gary Gygax for me. So it's very, very nice.
Well, that's very complimentary. Thank you very much.
Cool. So let's start with a bit of a warm up. There's of course, and I've listened to a few of your interviews, and I know it's something that's been coming up quite a lot with you. Which is just over a year ago. You have a homonymic name, movie name, obviously, coming out with Keanu Reeves, the whole action movie of John Wick.
Yeah.
Right? And
yeah, it's biographical.
Yes, of course.
They had to change a few details. They were Lithuanian gangsters and not Russian gangsters. And the dog was a corgi. But other than that, it's all true.
Completely
Absolutely
true.
all true. Yeah.
You just got out of it. The thing that I just thought was interesting, well, I mean, among many other things, but when I was trying to prepare for this interview and so looking for some of your articles that you might have written elsewhere from your main website and some other audio interviews, of course, the only thing that was coming up online was Keanu Reeves, which didn't used to be that way. And so it just forced me to wonder, like, did the movie have an impact on, like, the amount of visitors that you get to your website or the amount of interest that you got? Like, I wonder if it changed anything to your visits?
Not that I noticed. Maybe, but I didn't. If it wasn't significant enough for me to notice. It was fun when it came out, and it's created a whole bunch of kind of like John Wick memes, on the internet. But and those are fun. But no, I mean, I was very briefly in talks with some people about doing a role-playing version of it, because I think that John Wick writing a John Wick role-playing game about the movie John Wick would be just beyond meta, would be just so much fun. And I had a really good idea for it, but then they sold all of the rights to all the video game rights and everything. So if the movie was a bomb, I probably could have gotten it, but it was a success. So I wasn't able to get it, but we'll see.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, because I heard you in another interview mention the fact that you're briefly looking at that perspective, and you're not going to, like, there's going to be more of it. I think they're making a sequel, aren't they?
They are making a sequel, yes. And it should be fun. I liked the movie a lot. I thought it was a really smart action movie.
It was a lot of fun.
And I was particularly impressed with the editing and the shooting of the direction and the cinematography of the action scenes. You could tell that the movie was directed by fight coordinators because they worked really, really hard. Everyone worked very hard on the fight scenes, and they wanted to show the work. And I thought that was really neat. Watching the action scenes in long, steady shots, and watching the guys, really, working really hard, was a lot of fun, and I enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah, cool. That was really interesting. I don't have much to add. I did watch it. I had fun watching it. I thought it was a really fun watch. I don't know enough about action movies to distinguish like whether the scenes were shot or directed by a professional on that side of things. So that's like distinctions that kind of I don't really have.
Well, I spent 20 years in Los Angeles and tried very, very hard to get involved in making movies. And, not without, I say without any kind of shame or anything like that, it's really hard to get into the movie business. But that also meant that I really fell in love with movies when I was in LA. I lived in Santa Monica within walking distance of 3 small independent theaters. So I could go and see all kinds of movies. I could go see big major blockbusters, and then I could go see the small Coen Brothers release, or I could see Kung Fu Soccer. What was that called? Anyway.
I remember. Sorry, keep going. Yeah, the Stephen Chow movies. Yeah,
the Stephen Chow's. I could go see the Stephen Chow movies, which are really fun, and all within
Shaolin Soccer. Sorry.
Yeah, Shaolin Soccer. That was it. All within a walking distance of where I was living, and so I really fell in love with movies. I wrote a ton of scripts, and so that really played a lot into when, like, for example, when we started making 7th Sea, about trying to make it a cinematic role-playing game rather than something else. But anyway, I love movies, and I have a whole collection over there.
And a whole collection of scripts as well then.
I've got a few. I mean, most of them are bad. You have to write a whole bunch of bad ones
to get to the good ones.
Before you start writing good ones, and most of them are very bad.
Yeah. Well, that's something that you mentioned, and I heard. I believe you participated in a lot of different, a journal, newspaper, and a lot of different writing projects while you were in college, right?
Yeah, I was. I did a lot of writing for the college newspaper. I wrote plays, and really small one act plays with like maybe 2 or 3 characters and lots of dialogue. And I just did a lot of writing when I was in college, and working for the college newspaper was, and then when I moved to LA and started writing for Shadis Magazine professionally, it was the best training I could get being a writer, because you're under a deadline. You have to write about things that you don't care about. And you just have to work through it. 90% of writing is work. And it's the reason that a lot of people have I have like 5 novels, but I never really finished any of them. It's like, that's because you stopped when the work started.
Interesting.
When the enthusiasm is gone, and it's just, work, to actually get through things. And being a staff writer on a newspaper and on a monthly magazine with hard deadlines, and writing under 4 different pseudonyms so that my name doesn't appear on every single, thing in the magazine was some of the best training I ever had as a writer.
Yeah. I just read, we're in the National Novel Writing Month at the moment, NaNoWriMo. For those who don't know, it's a writing challenge to write a novel starting on the 1st of November and getting to 50,000 words of the novel by the end of the month. And I just read Neil Gaiman just posted a pep talk for It's exactly about what you just said, which is like, we're about halfway through and now the real work starts and you don't really want to do it anymore. And this is where like how the sausage is made and how the dirty stuff is. You just keep one word after the other. It's,
I saw a chart once that was really brilliant. It's a 7-point chart of the creative process. And part 1 is, and the first part is, this is awesome. And part 2 is, this is going to be tricky.
Yeah.
And then part 3 is, oh, this is not awesome anymore. And part 4 is, this is crap. And part 5 is, I'm crap. And then part 6 is, this is tricky. And part 7 is, this is awesome. And that's really, part 2, right there, part 2 is where people stop. Because that's when work starts.
Yeah.
And they go and they get distracted by something else, and they're like, oh, I will start working on this other thing because this is what I'm enthusiastic about. And they get, maybe 5,000 words, and then they stop and they go, oh, well, this is other thing that I'm really enthusiastic about.
Yeah. I have to pass that thing myself. I participated in NaNoWriMo last year, and I managed to do the 50,000 words. And so I have like an extremely ugly baby of a first draft that is like barely legible. And then I kind of put it aside. I started rereading myself, and I just couldn't be with like how bad it was. And I left it for months, on the side. So I've started working again on it, but I still haven't got through the whole thing yet.
I've also heard the analogy. I like the trunk analogy, which is you buy a trunk, and that's like a big box that sits at the front of your bed, right? It's as big as your bed, as the front of your bed. And you just start writing, and everything you write, you just put it in the trunk. And you put it in the trunk, and you put it in the trunk. Everything you write. And you write every day. And you just write every day. And it doesn't matter if it's good. It doesn't matter if it's bad. You just put it in the trunk, and you put it in the trunk, and you put it in the trunk. And then once the trunk is full, you grab the trunk, you take it to the dumpster, and you throw it away. And all of your bad writing is now out of your system, and you can start working on the good writing.
It's a good one. I like that.
Yeah.
I like that too. All right. Well, there's one thing I wanted to talk about because, well, not everybody listening to this, and actually probably most people listening to this, won't necessarily know much about role-playing games, or about tabletop games. So I want to make sure that we're explaining a little bit what it is. And, for those listening who don't know much, like how you describe them, how you define them. And I know it's an exercise that I really like that you've been looking at, that you talk about in a few different, of your blog posts and interviews that I've listened to. And it's interesting, like what I go, when I tell people I play role-playing games, who doesn't know them, I quickly fall back to saying, Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
Even though I never play Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah. I think that, and I think that I mean, that is the default, right? It's the branded game. It's what everyone associates with role-playing games.
Mm-hmm. So what do you use a reference, and how would you explain and define role-playing games to somebody who doesn't really know much about them?
I try to avoid the D&D reference for the sole reason that I don't like D&D, and I don't want people to associate me with it. So generally what I do is I say I make storytelling games.
Okay.
Which are cooperative storytelling, where it's not one person telling a story to a bunch of people, it's a bunch of people telling the story to each other.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that really is a much more accurate portrayal of the kind of games that I write. Because I don't think my games are like D&D. I think that that's inaccurate. I think that my games are much more about narrative and about telling the stories of heroes and things like that, rather than moving miniatures around and killing people who don't look like me so I can take their stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, that's very much the way that I've played, and that I've played with Julien for a long time. So it's not massively surprising that I like your games, and that, that I have the same kind of way of thinking about things, usually about storytelling, and the storytelling is the part that interests me the most.
Well, I mean, it's what makes role-playing games different than board games.
That's actually was going to be my next questions.
Yeah.
So, there you go. So and how do you differ? Well, how does it, what's the difference in terms of a design approach? So like, if you want to design a board game versus designing a role-playing game, do you think like about the game first, or do you have an idea and see like, what's the best support for it?
Well, I wrote an essay, called Chess is Not an RPG, Chess is Not a Role-Playing Game, that drew a huge ton of discussion. And I think a lot of people read about it but didn't actually read it. Right. And essentially the question that I ask, which I don't have a satisfactory answer for, is how is a role-playing game not a board game? Now, it's very clear that chess is not a role-playing game. I mean, it's very clear. However, you can make chess a role-playing game if you give the pieces motivations and names. Right?
Absolutely.
So you've just made chess a role-playing game. But still, that doesn't mean that chess is a role-playing game. It means you made it a role-playing game. Well, obviously, by adding motivations and things like that, that seems to be the key element, right? That the point of a role-playing game is actually not to win, right? The win condition in a role-playing game is to tell a good story, I think, right? But so what is that crucial element that differentiates a role-playing game from a board game? Now, there are role-playing games that are board games and it seems to me that there are role-playing games that are called role-playing games, but really all they are is board games that people are using to role-play.
Yeah, there are.
And I think that the first 4 editions of Dungeons and Dragons qualify, and that there is nothing in that game that separates it from a board game. Nothing at all. It's just that people are using it to role play. Just the same way that people can turn chess into a role playing game by adding elements to it that are not explicit in the rules. Now, on the other hand, there's a game like the Baron's game, the Baron Munchausen role playing game.
Actually, that's funny. Sorry, I'm talking to James Wallace next week.
Oh yeah, James is really, really brilliant. Yeah. So yeah, and there's the Baron Munchausen role playing game, which you cannot play as a role playing game. It's impossible to play it as a role playing game. And there are other games like that are similar. So for me, the key element of a role playing game has to be a game where the players are making decisions based on their characters' motivations. Right. Okay. Well, how is that not chess? I mean, and again, and in the article, I said over and over and over again, I'm really not sure what the answer to this question is. Yep. I would like to find out, and I'd like to have a discussion about it, but it seems clear to me that games that do not address this key problem, are missing the point of what makes role-playing games unique. And that was, kind of what that was about.
Yeah. And I really enjoyed reading it because it was an inquiry and it was really questioning exactly what this activity is. And what the fun of it is and why it's fun to be incarnating a different character or playing around with a different person. It made me think of last year I was playing with friends a board game called, Betrayal in the House of the Hill, right?
Yeah. It's a great game.
It's a great game. It's a lot of fun. And my friend who owns the game, so for everybody who doesn't know it, it's a game where you're playing investigators who are going to check out the house on the hill, like a creepy old house. And there's tiles that you get to turn little by little, so the design of the house is different every time. And my friend Sarah said, well, this is a great game, and plus it's a role-playing game. And I just kind of frowned, and I was like, really? And she was like, well, yeah, you have kind of characters and there's description of who they are. And then we just played them. And she told me about the fact that she played with her mom once, who decided to take this character and turn her into a rich dignitary with a southern drawl. And they just played around with the characters, play acting around the table. So it's not necessarily matching to the rules, but just as you suggested with chess, just adding some role play element for it, just for the sake of it.
Yeah, to make it more fun, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, one of my favorite board games, I think possibly my favorite board game is Diplomacy. Mm-hmm. Mainly because I suck at rolling dice. I'm awful.
Yeah, I'm pretty bad. I've got the same problem.
I am the guy on the far end of the spectrum who evens out all of the odds. And one of the reasons I like Diplomacy is because it's a game that it's all up to you.
Yeah.
It's entirely on your head. There are no dice, and it's all about you convincing other people that you're going to do what you want to do, what you say you're going to do. And for me, that's like the real challenge. So I love diplomacy because there are no dice, there are no random modifiers, there's no randomness, there's no, there's none of it. And it's all up to you. So, and one of the other elements I love about diplomacy is that first of all, there's a curse on the game that ruins friendships.
Yep.
Right. And we talk glibly about the diplomacy curse when it's actually entirely true. There's a magic power that game has to ruin lifelong friendships, right? And so one of the questions that I didn't do in the chess article, that I had a section on it that I removed it because I didn't think it made the article too long and it was kind of like a tangent, was the fact that why do people become so emotional about diplomacy? And I think that part of it is that you are so emotionally invested in the game because the game is about trust, right? You are so emotionally invested in the game that when you are betrayed, because you will be betrayed in that game, it's not that you betrayed France or that you betrayed Great Britain or you betrayed, Austria-Hungary. You betrayed me, right? And I think that there is something in there that harkens back to the same kind of emotional resonance that role-playing games can invoke that most board games cannot. And I think it's because there is the emotional distance between you and your piece in the game, right, is so fragile and thin. And I think that has a lot to do with what role-playing games are too.
It's certainly generating an emotional response.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you make me think about and you might know more about this than I do reading about game design, but all mammals play to learn, right?
Yes. We play to learn. Yeah.
Yeah. And so what do we learn by playing board games or role-playing games, do you think?
Oh, a lot. I think that I used to say that I think that every high school should have a logic and reasoning class. It's like we have the classic R's of reading, writing, and arithmetic, right? And we should add another one, which is reason. We should teach people how to think.
Yeah.
Right. The best, how the scientific method works and how faulty arguments work and, appeals to emotion and straw man arguments and learn what all these things are. We have to learn how to think. And I also think that if you're going to be a government official of any kind, that you should take game theory, and learn how, and not, and I mean like upper math game theory. I mean, the kind of stuff that because it was one of the best classes I took in college was a game theory class. And it really taught me about, that level of economics and that level of win, loss, gain, all that kind of stuff. And I think that a lot of government would be well suited to taking game theory and playing games and learning how game design works. Because a lot of, government is based on fairness, right? We want to be fair. We want to be, we don't want to be arbitrary. We want to give everybody the best opportunity they have to succeed because that helps everybody, right? That's the basic idea, at least, well, if you listen to the American Republican debates, that's not what they're about. But, if we are if government is in the business of making things fair for everybody and helping everybody out because helping you is going to help me, right? Then, hey, we should study how game theory works. We should study how games work because games are a really good way of teaching people about fairness and about adjudicating problems and about problem solving, right? And I think that that's what we get out of board games, at least. And one of the things we can get out of role-playing games is the basic skill of how to tell stories. Yeah. Which is, if you watch most Hollywood movies, and if you are like me, and I'm holding up my wrestling t-shirt, if you're a pro wrestling fan, Hollywood and the WWE do not know how to tell stories. They just don't. They have no idea how to tell stories, and that's why a lot of movies and most professional wrestling these days just stink, because they don't understand the basic concepts of how and why stories work. And role-playing games are a great way to teach people how and why stories work.
Cool. Well, that sounds like a good opportunity to ask you what the basic tenets of that would be then.
Well, it depends on what kind of story you want to tell, right? I mean, stories are big, complex things. And I always get really, what's the right word? I get amused when people are like, I had a comic on my wall that my ex-wife drew for me, because when I was at the AEG office, there was this big meme going around the office that, there's only so many stories in the world,
that's a big one that goes around. Yeah. I saw slides in the advertising industry that talk about that kind of stuff as well. There's multiple books and theories and sorry. Yeah. Keep going. Yeah.
So there's one guy holding up a book going, there's only 3 stories. And there's another guy holding up going, there's only 7 stories. And there's another guy holding up a book, there's only 22 stories. And in the corner, there's a guy at a typewriter writing. And there's arrows that says theorist, 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 theorist. And then there's a guy at the typewriter going writer.
Yeah.
There's only so many kind of stories. We'll tell that to Chuck Palahniuk, the guy who wrote Fight Club.
Yes.
Yeah. What? Yeah. Tell that to, what is his name? Christopher McQuarrie, who wrote The Usual Suspects. Tell that to, screw it. Just tell it to, who wrote, they just did P.T. Anderson just did a movie, Inherent Vice.
Oh, the yes.
Who wrote Gravity's Rainbow? Pynchon.
Yes.
Yeah, tell that to Pynchon.
Yes.
Right? Tell that to Philip K. Dick. Tell that to, there's only so many kinds of stories. Yeah, people who say that don't read stories. They read books about stories. Right? But yeah, there's all kinds of stories for all kinds of things. Fairy tales are stories we tell to children because they don't understand. You cannot tell a child, if you go out in the woods, you'll get lost.
Yeah.
They don't understand that. Literally, their child mind hasn't put together choice and consequence yet.
Yeah.
They just don't understand it. But if you tell them there's a monster in the woods that's going to eat them, then they won't go in the woods because they're afraid, and they won't go in the woods, right? So that's what fairy tales are. Fairy tales are stories that we tell to children to teach them lessons that they don't quite understand yet.
Yeah.
Right? But on the other hand, you have coming of age stories, which are, stories about the ritual of changing from a child into an adult, which is something a lot of modern cultures don't have anymore. We don't have that ritual that says, okay, it's time to take away all of your kid things and thrust you into adulthood, right? So we don't have that anymore. So we have people like Donald Trump who are, 60 whatever year old children who have never learned that it's time, to be an adult, and that the world is bigger than you. And there are some things in the world that are more important than you, type thing. Mm. And so, then we have stories about, the twilight of life and how to deal with that, and how to deal with the fact that you wake up in pain every day, which is what I'm dealing with now that I've moved into my, late 40s. I'm starting to deal with the idea of, I wake up and I slept wrong and I can't lift my arm above my shoulder, and that I can't, just last night I discovered I can no longer have buffalo wings.
That's really disappointing. That would be crushing.
my digestive system let me know that I can no longer have buffalo wings last night.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
And there's a part of that's an important part of life, is that stories are the Ariadne, and I'm getting very Joseph Campbell right now, but stories really are the Ariadne string that lets us know what's coming, right? This is what's coming in your life. This is what, this is giving you forewarning. Hey, this is what it's going to be like. Right. And I think that stories are really important in that way. And And so stories serve different kinds of purposes. Sometimes stories are just to make us feel better.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with, and I like Alan Moore has a really good distinction of there's only two kinds of stories. But he has a distinction between porn and art, pornography and art. And he's like, pornography is the writer giving the audience what it wants. So it could be sexual porn. It's like, the reason I'm watching porn is because I have a very specific purpose in doing it and I get what I want out of it.
Right.
But then a movie like the Transformers movie is porn.
Yeah.
It gives you exactly what you want. You know what you sit down when you watch it and you get it, Revenge movies are porn. Quentin Tarantino's movies, a lot of them are porn because you're like, I want a good revenge movie. Well, let's sit down and watch Quentin Tarantino because he'll give me what I want. But art is different in that it gives the audience what it needs, even if it doesn't know it. And I that could dance really close to being pretentious, but at the same time, I think that a lot of things like I like using Fight Club because it's very subversive and it's very popular, so a lot of people have seen it.
Yep.
And I think that a lot of David Fincher's movies are fall into that category, in that they lure you in with a premise and then really blindside you with all of this other stuff. And I really like that kind of storytelling. And I really like the idea that Fight Club starts off as kind of like porn. It's kind of like, hey, are you 30 something male? Are you sick of all of this stuff? Great. Here's this guy who's going to tell you everything you want to hear, who's going to make you feel powerful, who's going to make you feel important. And then we're going to show you that he's really full of shit. Right. And so it starts off one way and then ends up another way. And so, and that's a different kind of story and accomplishes a different kind of thing. It's a subversive story in a lot of ways. And then it subverts its own subversion, which is really fun.
Yes.
So yeah, stories are so important to us. We're a storytelling species.
Yeah, well, generally. And for you, like, what do you think? Did the storytelling, the interest in stories, I mean, like I know we are all interested in stories to a certain extent, but where did the interest in games and game design itself start out? Like, I heard you say in a couple of interviews, like your first game was, first role-playing game anyway, was Call of Cthulhu, but did you have other games before? Like, were you already writing stories before that, or?
Yeah. When I was in second grade, I was drawing my own comic books and selling them to my family.
Oh, that's
right?
brilliant.
That's awesome.
I like the fact that you're selling it. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
What kind of stories were you telling them?
I was writing SpiderMan Comics.
Really?
Yeah, I was writing and drawing SpiderMan Comics, and I tried so hard. I tried so hard to be an artist.
Yeah.
And it just wasn't in it. It just didn't happen for me. And it's not because I had lack of passion. It's because I had lack of skill. I couldn't do it. So I'm a huge comic book fan, and I was reading Daredevil, and I noticed that the artist, Frank Miller, had become the writer. And I went, wait a minute. And for some, and that clicked in my little head, which is, comic books have writers? Wait a minute, I am writing. I am because I saw myself as an artist. I didn't see myself as a writer at all. I was drawing comic books, and then I realized that comics have writers and artists. So I found a friend of mine, and this is like in fifth grade, I found a friend of mine who was a really good artist, and we got together and we started writing and drawing comic books together. Right. And we sold those, and we actually, made money off of that in fifth grade, believe it or not. Awesome. We were, making comic books and selling them and stuff like that. And then I moved, so I lost track of that. But that's really when I started writing, was in fifth grade. And I had this wonderful teacher named Mr. Jones, who was just fantastic. And at the parent teacher conference, my mom said, Mr. Jones, John doesn't go out and play. He stays in his room and he writes and he reads all the time. All he's doing is reading. And to his credit, Mr. Jones said, "That's a good thing. I can't force my kids to read, and your kid just can't stop." And so, changed my mom's attitude about that whole thing. And that's really where it started. And I think the first time that I tried to make a role-playing game, so my friend Jim Wilson and I in high school were playing Dragonlance.
Okay.
And we didn't like the spell system. And he was running Dragonlance, and they didn't like the spell system. So we stayed up all weekend and made this new spell system for Dragonlance. And then we were like, well, if we're making a new spell system, why don't we make a new class system? And we just started working. And really that little homebrewed fantasy heartbreaker was the first time that I really got the notion that you can make all this stuff up.
Yeah.
Which is the joke that I always tell people at game design seminars, which is sooner or later, someone's going to figure out that we're just making all this up.
Yeah.
It
is a good one. I had noted that, and I heard you say it before, and I thought it was absolutely brilliant. And I thought it was also brilliant that, well, authors are all making it up, right? And we're still buying them. We're still buying the books. And I also liked, and I think you said it was somebody else's definition saying that a role-playing game is where you're the author and the actor at the same time. Is that what it is?
Yeah. That's Robin Laws. Robin Laws said the role-playing game is the only literary medium. And I like that he used that phrase, is the only literary medium where the author and the artist are the same person. And I always jump in with my snarky comment, except for fan fiction. But but he's totally right. And as a matter of fact, I've explored that idea, I think that Robin is really, really, I like his definition a lot. And I also think that when you are playing a role-playing game, one of the things to consider is that, and is that the other people in the group are your audience.
Yes.
You are playing to them, right? And I think that a lot of, and this comes from LARPs. This comes from me playing in a lot of LARPs, because I really like the immersion of LARP, of live action role playing.
Yeah.
Which is, a role playing game where you're walking around and talking to people and you're not sitting at a table rolling dice, but since your audience may not know what a LARP is.
No, absolutely. Thank you. I was just going to pick on it, but you said so. And actually that reminds me of something else we were talking about earlier. You talked about the Model UN in another interview, and like talking about game and learning in government, which I thought was brilliant. Talking about the Model UN as it's a live action role playing game, basically. So there's nothing mysterious about what a role playing game is. It's like you're taking on a role and you have goals and you're trying to further what's going on with your character.
Yeah, I was at a LARP seminar where people were talking about designing a LARP and how to design a LARP, and they were. I don't mean to be disparaging, but just like D&D is the branded, tabletop role-playing game, Vampire is the branded LARP, right? Absolutely. It's if you think of LARP, you think of Vampire, people walking around playing vampires.
Yeah.
And so the people who were on the panel were all vampire LARPers. And sure, that is a way to do a live-action game. Definitely. It's not an invalid way of doing it, but it's also not the only way of doing it. And when I was, we're at and people were asking, well, how do you run a LARP? And how do you do this? And how do you do that? And they were answering from the sole perspective of a vampire LARP. And then it came down, because it's a seminar, so we're all sitting at a table and it's coming down to me. And I said, Model United Nations is a LARP. It has no rules other than Roger's Rules of Order. And there are no stats, there are no dice, there are no hand gestures, there's nothing. There's no hit points, there's no falling damage, there's no nothing. Model United Nations is a LARP where I'm pretending to be Argentina and you're pretending to be Yugoslavia, and we have to find a solution to a problem. And it stunned them. the idea of this very simple, idea. A friend of mine, Trey, is at the Ronald Reagan Library designing a LARP about being in the Situation Room in the White House when a national crisis breaks out.
Wow.
And he has a budget, and he's going to be using video, and he's going to be using all these things. And there's no stats. There's no attack roll. No, you're the Secretary of State, and I'm the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
Yeah.
And somebody else is the president. And Ebola has just broken out in the United States. What do we do? That's a LARP.
That's really interesting. Do you know how popular the escape rooms concept has become a bit everywhere? And I wonder if this kind of LARP could be taking over, like, it could be a similar experience to what is sold as a business in several cities as an escape room, couldn't it?
Yeah. It's, what is escape room? I haven't seen, or is that the where you're locked in the room and you have to get out?
Yeah, and there's puzzles and like different stuff you have to pull out. And you're usually a group of like either like kind of 2 to 6 people. And they've just been mushrooming in many different cities around the world. And I was in Singapore last year. I used to live there. They have been there, and they just appeared in Paris. And I think Julien, so 2 things on Julien. Julien used to be a storyteller for several years for Vampire LARP, and just recently went to an escape room. I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add or questions you might have on either of those things.
Let's talk about LARP.
Yeah, let's talk about LARP.
Sure.
First, I was a vampire storyteller for maybe 6 years or 7 years, I think. We played in Paris, but we played in whole France, in fact. And yes, that vampire LARP is a way of LARPing, but it's not the only way. I did maybe fantasy LARPs, I did sci-fi LARPs. There are many, many ways to play it. And the Model United Nations you talked about is really, really... That's a really nice example. Maybe 2 weeks ago, I was in a convention, a big convention in Nantes, in France. And we talked about LARPing and role-playing game with someone who used this in a work environment.
Yeah.
Is teaching crisis resolution to maybe 50-year-old people who work in, I don't remember which kind of enterprise they work, but that was really, really interesting to see how those, the things you learn in LARPing and in RPGs can help to solve problems. That's what you said earlier. And I know that Willem will talk about it in the conference soon. So maybe that's your turn to speak about it.
Yeah. And I'm talking, that's part of the reason, not part of the reason I'm talking to you, but it is a very interesting one to explore. And I don't know much about it. And I know it is used for there's definitely team building exercises, conflict resolution. But one of the difficult points on including these kind of role-playing game elements, as far as I know, in organizations, institutions, is that unless you get it in such a way that everybody is on board, it's easy for people to just get cynical about it.
Yes.
And that's the pitfall. It's like you really have to get people on board first somehow. I don't know. And I don't have the perfect rule for it yet, but.
Well, you got to bring the fun.
Yeah.
That's the whole thing about it is that you got to bring the fun. And that's the most elusive part of it.
Yeah.
That's the part that's the hardest part to get, right? I know game designers who say that game fun is the enemy of game design.
That's fascinating.
And I don't understand that.
Not because I don't understand either.
I don't get it. I've heard it, and I've had people explain it to me, and it's been explained with. There's an American phrase that I learned in college called verbal spaghetti, which is also there's a more popular phrase for it now called word salad, which is they start just throwing these. Well, the big problem with fun is that the emergence doesn't concord with the proper amount of intelligence of the gamer to be able to process and I'm like, just stop. You don't even know what you're talking about. Just stop.
Because it's funny because I work in the advertising and marketing industry. We love our buzzwords as well.
Yeah.
There's storytelling is a big one at the moment. We talk about and every sauce. What do you think about storytelling in the advertising industry? Is that a good fit or?
Well, you guys probably have much different ads than we do. I occasionally see European TV, and it's very different from American TV. Right now, the big trend in American advertisements, which is really weird. This will make no sense. I mean, maybe it does, because maybe you guys have seen this. But the big trend is to say, look at how stupid our customers are.
Oh, really?
It's weird. It's I have this product, right? And I really like the product. And somebody comes along and says, hey, do you have some of that product? And I say, yeah, I got some of this product. Hey, I really like that product. And I say, yeah, too bad it's mine. Go away. Product. And that's the advertisement.
Really?
It's like, oh, your customers are jerks.
That's really interesting. I've not come across that kind of stuff because, of course, well, number one, I don't really watch much TV, and then the only ads I'm watching are ones on YouTube that are published on the industry magazines like Ad Age and Adweek and whatever else. So I'm watching the European ones and the notable American ones. So you only see like the best or what's considered interesting to watch somehow.
Yeah. America is really enamored with anti-intellectualism right now. It's a phrase that Isaac Asimov coined. I like to call it the cult of dumb, where, movies, where we revere stupid people.
This is where Mike Judge had something with Idiocracy.
Yes, exactly. The Idiocracy is kind of like the anti-cult of dumb movie, but it's movies like Will Ferrell movies where he gets really stoned and runs around naked and woo, isn't that funny? And I just really, I understand why, but we're seeing it in, like presidential stuff, like Ben Carson, saying stuff like, oh, the world is only 6,000 years old and the pyramids were used to store grain and the cult of dumb has reached the presidential elections. And I'm just really half of me, there's half of me who's like, please do not let these people be elected. And then there's the other half of me who's like, please let these people get elected so we can never, ever see this again. Right? Because sometimes things in history have to happen in order for us to realize we should never let them happen again. So.
That's an interesting thought. It just makes me think like how much mass media, I think a lot, but how much do you think mass media, social media, and things like that have participated to like spreading out the quick culture of dumb like that you're calling it? Did it participate a lot? Because I'm just thinking about, a certain generation that was just glued in front of the TV. There's still most of the people glued in front of the TV, except that we also have our phones like down to right on front of our nose. And, and we do, like we all have our phones or taking selfies all over the place. And
I can take my TV with me.
Yes.
And watch it in line. Right. Yeah. It's, I don't know. I'm not smart enough to really get down to the why. I can observe it and go, oh crap, this is going to suck. But, that requires people who are much smarter than me to get into the why. But it's always been part of American culture, anti-intellectualism. Asimov was writing about it in the 40s, right? So, it's been at least that long, who knows? Yeah,
that's all right. Well, we just move on. We're not necessarily talking about the whole of culture. Let's come back to something else. So come back to movies that will lead us to one of your games and one of my favorite, that you had news for recently. Talking about The Princess Bride a little bit.
Yeah.
Which I believe you said that, one of the best, if not the best movie ever made, which I tend to agree.
Yeah, I have a little thing that I do because I'm a Discordian where I talk about the greatest movie ever made.
Which I believe you said it was Big Trouble in Little China.
Big Trouble in Little China is the greatest movie ever made. And so is Fight Club, and so is The Sting. And it changes, I have a real problem with critics of any kind, of movie critics, role-playing critics. Never trust anyone who gets paid to criticize other people's accomplishments. I just, nah. So as kind of like a counter, subversive thing, I'm like, well, this is the greatest movie ever made. As opposed to
just as an assertion, basically.
Yeah, as an assertion, right?
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of E Prime. Are you familiar with E Prime?
No, I'm not.
E Prime is a linguistical tool that removes the verb to be from the language.
Really?
So you can't say this movie is good. You can't say this movie is slow. You can't say that this book is boring. You have to say I got bored reading the book.
Okay.
So it changes. What happens is that it changes the subject and the object of the sentence. It changes the subject from the movie is X to I am X. And I feel that if more critics wrote in E Prime, we would see less critics. So when I say the greatest movie ever made, I'm essentially saying I really like this movie.
Yeah.
And on my blog, I write unreviews of movies, which are essentially me going, I watched this. I had a really good time watching this. And this is why I had a really good time watching this. You might enjoy this too if these kind of things, appeal to you, which I feel is a really honest review as opposed to, well, I'm the authority on film.
Yeah.
And here's what you should think about it.
My favorite movie review system is a friend of mine that created, I don't know if he's still running it, but he created a movie review system it's a binary movie review system. Every movie is either a 0 or a 1. That's it. So you just, every time you'd go to the movies, he would tweet it out, and, there's a website which is called the Fella Binary Reviews, and
I'll go check it out. Big Trouble in Little China is the greatest movie ever made. There's two kinds of people in the world: people who love that movie and people who haven't seen it yet.
Yeah.
That's just it. Every single line of that movie, is quotable.
I have to watch it again. It's been ages, honestly. I haven't seen it in a long time.
Every single line of that movie is quotable. I have so much fun watching it. I laugh all the way through it. And, there's that. The first movie I remember seeing was The Sting with
I love that movie as well.
Yeah, I love that movie too. It's the first movie I remember seeing. And I remember walking out of the theater and telling my dad, I want to be that when I grow up.
Awesome.
How do I be that? And I had no idea what a grifter was. I had no idea what a con man was. And I was like, I want to be that when I grow up.
Yeah.
And then, and The Princess Bride. It's the greatest movie ever made.
So
it's the perfect movie.
What came first? So can you talk a little bit about 7th Because so 7th is a game that you designed. Do you want to tell us a little bit about it? And so these movies inspired you, but tell us a little bit about it. That'd be great.
7th originally started as a discussion between Jennifer and I, my ex-wife Jennifer and I, about doing a new game for Alderac Entertainment Group, which I was working for at the time, because I was totally burned out on Samurai. I had told every story I wanted to tell, and I was just done. I was done with Samurai. I needed something else, and we threw together a bunch of stuff that we liked.
Yep.
We wanted a dark, sexual, political game. Jennifer was very big on blood magic. It had to be like visceral, like slicing your hand open to making the blood, make the magic and all that kind of stuff. And so we threw together a bunch of notes, and then we made a pitch, and essentially what we pitched was what would end up in 7th to be Vodace.
Okay, got it.
And so we pitched that to AEG, and at the time AEG was like asking everybody, while we were working on that, John Zinser came up with this idea. It's like, I'm going to have everybody pitch an idea for what our next game is going to be. And so we put together the pitch for what would become 7th and we threw it up. And then other people got involved, and we started talking about what else we could do. And John didn't like that the focus of it was so narrow. He also, there are other elements of it that he didn't like. He didn't like that it was very dark. He didn't like that, so it started metamorphosizing into something else. And it kind of clicked in my head because I was reading a biography of Isaac Newton at the time, which is a book called The Last Sorcerer, which is really good book about Newton. And I walked into John's office and I said, the game is Isaac Newton, Man of Action. And he was like, I don't know what that means. And I went, Ugh! So we talked about it a lot, and eventually it became 7th became, what it is, which is a game that I had a big sign on my wall that said, what would Errol Flynn do? And then my wife put another sign under it that said everyone. But, there's that. But and that was like the theme of the game. The theme of the game was, how do we duplicate an Errol Flynn movie? How do we duplicate The Princess Bride? How do we make a game that feels like that?
Yeah.
And that's where 7th came from.
And that's one of the things I absolutely love about it, which is how do you bring being a hero higher than color, like, swinging chandeliers that always wins, which brings us back to an article that you recently wrote on your blog about, what's really cool about being in a role-playing game is winning, is doing great things with your character. Losing is not so great necessarily. I mean, it's not necessarily something you're looking for.
Yeah, it's less of losing, and it's more of what my buddy Jared Sorensen calls the whiff factor.
Okay.
Which is, I am, let's use a Game of Thrones reference. I am Tyrion Lannister, and in front of all these people, I got my hands tied, and I have to make this big speech to save my life or I get killed. So, luckily I'm Tyrion Lannister, and I have, is everybody still there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just lost the video. That's okay.
Sorry, is there something?
So anyway, I'm Tyrion Lannister, and I'm going to make this big speech. And fortunately, I have this skill called the Tyrion Lannister speech that saves my life, right? And I've put all of my points into it. And so now I make a roll, and hey, I rolled a 1 and I fail and I get killed. And that's the whiff factor. The other element that Jared brings up is the locked door problem, which works like this. You're in a dungeon, and you come up to a locked door, and the fighter says, no problem, I'll break it down. And he fails his strength roll. And the thief says, no problem, I'll pick the lock. And he fails his pick lock roll. Okay, and now what do you do?
Yeah.
The adventure's on the other side of the door, right? What do you do? It also comes into play when you're Sherlock Holmes and there's a clue you need to find in order for the adventure to move forward, and you fail your clue finding roll because, there's a chance that you're going to fail. Because failure is interesting, and that's like, it's not only boring and it's not only counterproductive, but it demonstrates a complete lack of understanding of how story works. And if role-playing games are about telling stories, then failure has to be interesting.
Yeah.
Right? It's not that failure makes things interesting. It's that failure has to be interesting. Otherwise, it's just failure.
Yeah, there has to be a dramatic something or something that happens to the character. Yeah. Maybe a choice, which is one other area that role-playing games are particularly interesting. And we talked about this, with Julien on several of our podcasts, which is like, and you talk about it as well. Moral dilemmas or important choices, which is one of the elements that's interesting about stories generally.
Yeah, I don't care about random failure. Yeah. I mean, there's a cartoon that I love, which is the cartoon of George Martin, the guy who writes Game of Thrones, calling his friends, inviting them over to a D&D game because he needs to write the next chapter of Game of Thrones. And on the other side of the phone, there's friends going, no, George, you're a psychopath and all you do is kill our characters. Goodbye. And they hang up, and the final panel is him sitting alone at the gaming table, right? Yeah. It's like, yes, if you kill off everybody arbitrarily, I'm going to stop caring about people. Yeah. Why would I care about anyone? If you're just going to kill them because you can. We recently out here, Phoenix has a huge geek community. Mm-hmm. And so we throw a Halloween party with, like 100 people or more at it. And the theme this year was Game of Thrones. And I thought, great, I'll go as George Martin with a beard and the funny hat and a clipboard with all the characters' names on them. And I went up to people and said, hi, what's your name and why are you important? And they hesitated, and I crossed their name off the list. He said, "No, you die." Okay, what's your name and why are you important? And then and this got around the party, so people started preparing for me.
Right.
And they showed up and they said, "Well, I'm Jon Snow, and this is why I'm important." And I went, "I don't care. You die." And then walked on, right?
That's fun.
And so it's hardcore, man. So for me, it's like I really get upset when people say that dice make the game fair. Like, dice don't make the game fair. Dice are arbitrary. Dice are not sentient. They cannot make decisions. They cannot arbitrate. Right? They just roll random numbers. That's all they do. People are fair, right? It's not really true anymore because we've learned more about the animal kingdom, but the idea that humans are the only animal that can recognize justice, right? And that's not even true anymore because we've seen other animals can do that too. But, we're one of the only species that recognize justice, and we're one of the only species that that can say, hey, you know what? That's not fair. We should make that right. So when that comes to telling stories, how do dice make failure interesting? They don't. They just provide failure. We are the ones who make failure interesting.
Yep.
So the point of the article was that I'm just going to design a game system. I'm not saying that the new 7th Sea is like this. It could be like this, quite possibly be like this. And I may have wrote it while I was designing the new 7th Sea system, maybe, but where the heroes just succeed. And dice just determine your degree of success. And then you choose when your character fails because it would be interesting, and then the game master rewards you for doing it. Right? That is something that I've been playing a lot with, that whole idea that failure is a player option.
Yeah.
And it's in the hands of the players. And the GM can bribe you and say, it'd be really interesting if your character didn't succeed here, and I have this little point thing that's worth a lot, and I will give it to you if you choose to make your character fail. And to me that's something that I don't think has been explored in role-playing games.
Perhaps not enough, or not well enough, anyway.
Yeah, but I'm exploring it, and it's interesting so far.
It sounds very interesting. Julien, anything you want to add or ask on that side?
I just played last week a game who uses such a rule. Not exactly the same, but we could at any time choose to fail to succeed really well on the next roll. So that is being explored also.
What was the game?
The game is called, it's a game in French from a Swiss game designer. That's called Tigre Volant, so Flying Tigers, I must say. It's a sci-fi game. It's really, really nice in this way. But it's currently being wrote, and I think the new edition will come out maybe, what was he saying, 2017 or something like that. In 2 years from now, I think.
Awesome.
So you will be first. I think that when you explain that failure has to be interesting, that's what I learned when I read for the first time Houses of the Blooded. It was a kind of a revelation in role-playing games for me. So how the new system is different from the one you made for the Houses of the Blooded game?
Well, it's funny because I've said this on a couple occasions. Houses of the Blooded is a fantasy role-playing game where instead of playing a wandering nomadic sellsword who murders people who don't look like you for money, you're a noble, so you have people for that, and they go out and do that for you. It really drew from the original notes that Jennifer and I made for 7th Sea.
Yeah, right. That's what I thought when you explained to us what 7th Sea was like in the first iteration of the game.
I was going through an old box of stuff, and I came across the original idea, like notes that Jennifer and I wrote down for it, and I went, "There's a really good game here." So yeah, I wrote that up, and that's what. And there's the visceral blood magic and the politics and it's dark and it's about tragedy rather than success. And really that came about, failure in houses came about because, and the book is dedicated to Jared Sorensen because it's really his mechanic, is the idea that if you roll high, the player gets to say, what happens to the character. And if you roll low, then the player, or then the GM says what happens to the character. And it's not about success or failure at all in any way. In no way is success or failure implied or explicit in the die roll. It's about who gets to say what happens. And I found that that was really good for writing stories about writing tragedy, where the hero fails in the end, because the player has the ability to control their failure. And if the player is in charge of their failure, I found in playtesting the game that they were more than happy to have their characters go down in a big flaming pile of, awesomeness, because they were the ones who were doing it. They were the ones who were saying it, rather than the GM saying, and your character fails and you die alone and no one knows who you are, type thing. If the player gets to say that about their character, they're happy to do it. Right. And, so the system for houses worked like that. The system for that we're discussing that could be in 7th Sea, is different in that it's all about success. And it's the opposite. It's about how does the play, if you are Inigo Montoya from Princess Bride, or if you're Captain Blood, if you're Errol Flynn playing Captain Blood, or, any of these things, everybody is awesome all the time. Even when they fail, they are awesome. They fail in a really spectacular way, and they fail on their terms.
Yeah.
Right. So why don't we mimic that in a role-playing game and make it, like we were talking about before about pornography, making it, there's an American phrase, which you guys may have caught on by now, which is competence porn.
I've not heard that one.
Competence porn is for, have you guys seen the West Wing TV show?
Yes.
Love the West Wing. My favorite show, probably.
In the West Wing, everybody is awesome all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Right? Even when they fail in this big spectacular way, this big spectacular dramatic way. Everybody knows everything about everything, right? And it makes and it's far less about what will we do as opposed to what can we do. Right? Wow. It's a show about moral dilemmas. It's a show about all these things. It's like, let's cure cancer in 10 years. Well, we can't really have the president walk out and say we're going to cure cancer in 10 years because we don't know if we can. And the other side of the argument is we should have the president walk out and say we can cure cancer in 10 years because then we will.
Yeah.
Right. And so, that's really, there's that. There's another American TV show called Confidence.
I've heard of it. I've not seen that, though.
There's another one called Leverage.
Yep, same.
Which is, there is a guy on the show who is, the best safecracker in the world, period. And if you put him in front of a safe, he will open it because he knows how to open it, because he knows how to open every safe that you can put in front of him, right? And that's the phrase, is competence porn. It's like, I love watching people who are the best in the world doing what they do best in the world.
Yes.
Right.
Absolutely.
The Avengers movie is a lot like that.
Yeah.
Right? The Marvel movies are a lot about, characters who are just awesome.
Yeah. Ocean's 11.
Yeah. Ocean's 11 is another really good one. Yeah. A lot of Confidence Man style movies.
Putting best teams together. Yeah.
Yeah. You put the best team together and they go out and they do their thing. So if I was going to, remake the 7th Sea system, I might be interested in investigating that. And, if you are, if you are a guy who has studied swordplay for 20 years, you're not going to roll a 1.
Yeah.
You're just not, there's always a chance for failure. No, there's not. There is not always a chance for failure.
I like what you're saying as well, because there's an idea, and I don't know if that's something that you're considering for the rewrite or the new edition of it, which I've seen in a mechanic of in a couple of other games, or I do anyway with my groups of players, which is like, I ask my players to just create a group concept, so that there's, you're going to explain to me why does it make sense that all your characters are together?
Yeah.
And I believe it was, Game of Thrones does that. So as in, like, you're all part of the same house.
Yeah.
So the Game of Thrones role-playing game, just for anybody who doesn't know. So you create a group of characters, and generally in a role-playing game, you're a group of people, 3 to 5 people, let's say. And you create your own characters. But I find it's generally an enjoyable experience if there's, not only do you have personal motivation as a character, but there's a motivation as a group. So there's a reason why you function as a group. And it's interesting when that's part of the game.
Yeah, we did that. I mean, that was one of my primary goals for Legend of the Five Rings.
Yes.
And one of the challenges of Legend of the Five Rings was, why is a Crab Clan Samurai and a Phoenix Clan Samurai and a Scorpion Clan Samurai and a Unicorn Clan Samurai all in the same group?
Yeah.
That doesn't make any sense. And we came up with the solution of the idea of imperial magistrates. The idea that you swear fealty to the emperor to serve the emperor and to serve the empire above your clan, right? But then that creates the problem of your clan coming to you and going, hey, we need you to do this thing. And you're like, I'm sworn to the emperor. I'm sworn to the clan. And, that's one of the huge themes in Legend of the Five Rings is loyalty.
Yeah.
Right. And who do you owe loyalty to? Who do you owe the most loyalty to? And, that's a legitimate question in that game.
Yeah.
And then in Houses of the Blooded, it's much the same way. It's like, I belong to a house, but I have friends. Who am I loyal to? Am I loyal to the house, or am I loyal to my friends?
All right, cool. I want to move on a little bit and change topic. So I'm preparing for this speech at the end of the month where I'm talking at a conference. I'm talking to other marketers. And talking about business. And the question is, what I'm looking into, what is marketing and what is business in general can learn from tabletop and or role-playing games and game design. Do you have any ideas?
You want me to write your speech for you?
No, not at all. Just like, no, not at all. Like, what do you think? Is there anything to learn that can be brought into the business, into the world of business, or into the boardroom, or anything like it?
Especially since the fad of cooperative board games has come out.
That is true.
Right. House on the Hill is a cooperative board game until someone gets to be revealed to be the traitor, right?
Yes, exactly.
But games like Pandemic.
Yeah.
Games like
Zombicide.
Exactly. They're games like Dead of Winter.
Yes, that's the one I was just thinking of. Yeah.
I love Dead of Winter, which are cooperative games, right? Yes. They teach you how to communicate to each other. They teach you how to work together. They teach you how to problem solve. They teach you how to come up with solutions for seemingly improbable, impossible tasks. All of those things. I think that cooperative board games, while some of them fall into the trap of one person takes over and everybody just does what they say.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I think that a lot of cooperative board games are incredibly useful for all of those things, all of those skills, and if, and that's what I would, focus on is the idea that of the cooperative board game, as opposed to, the cutthroat board games of other things, which teach different skills. They teach, they teach how to be, and not only do they teach how to be, how to, specifically, I think what the most important thing to take away from board games is sportsmanship.
Yep.
Right. But that's not part of the game. That's not in the game. Right. That's something that you learn playing games, in that you play a game with a group of players and Jim is a jerk all the time. So eventually you just stop inviting Jim.
Yeah.
Right. And that's a lesson. That's like a skill, right? That's a skill that you learn. You learn how to tell Jim, hey, Jim, you're being a jerk. And, we need you to stop being a jerk, or please don't show up. Right. a lot of people don't realize that right there, that little scene is a skill that you have to learn how to do, because you can do it wrong. Doing it wrong. There are different ways of performing that little scene.
Yep.
Right. That will be productive. That will mean that Jim stays in the group and changes his behavior, or that means that you never talk to Jim again. Right. So I think that one of the elements of gaming that is not explicit in the games, but is like the behaviors that games encourage, are those kinds of skills.
Yeah. That's brilliant. Cool. Thank you. That's very, very interesting.
I'm throwing pennies so my cat will chase them. She brings back pennies.
She brings back pennies?
She brings back pennies, yeah.
That's funny.
I don't know. Let me see if I can show you guys. Where's she at? She's right on the corner there. You can see her tail.
Yes. You can see her looking for the pennies.
She's bringing. No, here she comes. She's bringing back the penny. Nobody can see this but you guys. But there she is.
Yeah.
She's bringing. Now listen real closely. Oh, you can't hear it because she dropped it on a soft thing. But yeah, she'll bring the penny back. So here's the penny. And there she goes. She's shaking the penny again.
That's funny.
Yeah. She is that's Lynn. She's the world's neediest cat. But she's also really smart.
Cool.
So
another question I had, there was a blog post, and one of them you mentioned that you can't design a game for marketing, and you mentioned something about, what people would want, and if you design what people want, in a similar, like the Ford quote, like if they designed what people want, they'd have said a faster horse, right?
Yeah.
And just did something that, and you said that people, if they want something, then they're going to be demanding the exact opposite if you give it to them.
Yeah.
So saving yourself some trouble, I was just like, hey, what if we do this? This is kind of, and the predictive texting when you type into Google, just give you something. And I was just surprised. I typed what people want and said, people want my power. So I said, people want my power. So if you think what the opposite, what would be the opposite that you would design a game about?
The opposite of people want my power?
Yeah.
You designed the George Orwell 1984 game where people want to be powerless.
Interesting.
Because that's part of the sinister, the real sinister part of 1984.
Yeah.
And the sinister part of V for Vendetta that I think was completely lost in the film adaptation is that people just let it happen.
Yes.
And in designing a game, I had somebody at a game design seminar, and I don't know what happened to them, but they said, I want to design a game about that's essentially 1984. And I was like, okay, well, what do you play in that game? They said, well, you play Winston Smith and you're trying to fight against I said, no. You should be playing a Big Brother. That's the role-playing game you want to make. You want to make the game about controlling people because people want to be controlled. They want to be told. There is part of our head that wants to be told what to do and what to think. And, and so, cause it's easier, right? We have developed cultures that are obsessed with luxury because we want to have, we want to be told what to do. We want to be told what to think. There's a really great Alan Moore line, from one of his magical rituals where he's like, the newspaper comes out and tells us what to think and who to vote for and who to think about when we masturbate. And I was like, wow, that's so powerful and so true. And, and that's a real part of modern culture. And hey, make a game about that where you get to be that person. You get to tell people what to think and who to vote for and all the rest of it, So I think that would be really interesting to make that kind of game. And I've had that in the back of my head for a while, but it's also really, really cynical.
Yeah,
and
it's definitely cynical.
And I've been trying to get away from cynicism. I've been trying to be a little bit more optimistic.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I like 7C generally as well.
Yeah, it is an optimistic game. I've stopped making New Year's Eve resolutions. And I have New Year's Eve mottos. I have New Year's mottos. So I pick a phrase that I try to, stick with. The first time I did it, my motto was, we're all in this together.
Nice. That's a good one.
And my next one was how are you helping?
Very good.
And I would ask that of me, and I would also ask it of other people. So
yeah.
It's like, how is this helping people?
Yeah.
Well, the purpose of life isn't to help other people. And I went, okay, so I never need to talk to you again. Yeah. All right, type thing. So
my brother's motto is work hard and be nice to people.
Yeah, that's a good motto. And I found that I keep them. It's like I don't switch them out. I just start, I have a list now.
Yeah, you can add another one once you have control. Well, once you start mastering one, you can add another one, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nice. Just moving on, I'd like to talk a little bit about the business and Kickstarter, because you've talked about that a little bit, and I agree with you. You mentioned like it's completely transformed the gaming industry. Yeah. I read an article recently that was more focused on board games, but still, that it's growing at a fast rate, like reaching I think it was like 880 million revenue in the US last year. And growing, and there's like bigger and bigger like board game cafes that usually go in pairs with like craft beer bars or brew pubs or things like that, which is I quite like as well, because I like my beers. And of course, like you use Kickstarter as well, and many different authors use Kickstarter as well. Do you have any thoughts of like where do you think things are going with this? Is this like a sustainable model for game designers as well?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, definitely. It's patronage is a very old idea.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm glad that it's made a comeback, because it means that people like me can do things like this, right? I really resent – I'm a big fan of South Park, but I thought that Trey and Matt were really off target when they did their Kickstarter episode. And they're like, this is just begging for money. This is, to do nothing. I'm like, screw you. I work really hard. It's, and when it was first presented to me as an option, that was my opinion. I was like, it feels like begging. Yeah. And, and Mark Diaz Truman, who is now the essentially the guy who runs the financial elements of John Wick Presents. He was the one who convinced me to do Kickstarter, and it's been a roaring success because I have a guy named Mark Diaz Truman who has an economics degree as opposed to my, philosophy degree, which is not very helpful with economics. And he runs, and he like shows me, magic numbers on spreadsheets and talks above my head and goes, if we do this, this, so this. And I'm like, yeah, do that. That sounds great. I'm going to go and write about elves.
It's good that you got somebody taking care of the finances aspect.
Yeah.
One thing I saw was missing from me, and I was talking about that with Julien, and I've missed, like, I've participated in a couple of your projects, well, Wilderness in particular, but I saw that it seems that there's a button missing on the Kickstarter to follow your favorite creators. So there's Patreon for that, or you have to follow Twitter, but there's so much information. I'm not always following everything that's going on. But I think it's a feature that would be cool to be added to Kickstarter so that I can get news from my favorite, creators of projects, basically.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a really good suggestion.
Yeah. So I'll get in touch with them, actually.
Yeah. I want a follow button.
Yes, exactly. It's just a follow button, basically. And do you think there's anything changing or that will be changing in the world of role-playing games generally in the coming years? Do you think it's going to be creeping up on other styles of games or evolving anything to do with, video games? Or it's a vast question, but if you have any immediate thoughts right now.
I think role-playing games are always changing. Yeah. If you look at D&D 5th edition, which is my favorite iteration of D&D, it's an indie game. Mm-hmm. It really is. It looks a whole lot like Dungeon World.
Yeah.
It's got this thing where you get experience points if you act as your character would. Whoa. It's got a lot of stuff in it. And if the mainstay of if the branded role-playing game can change that much, and it changed. There is a huge difference on a lot of different levels between D&D 4th edition and D&D 5th edition, and even D&D 3rd edition and D&D 5th edition, right? They still have the same trappings, but they all work in very weird ways, right? So I think that, people are innovating role-playing games all the time, and it's good. It's a good thing that people are innovating. Otherwise, we'd just all be writing D&D supplements.
No, absolutely. I agree. I agree.
And I think it's happening all the time.
Yeah. Cool. Julien, was there any other questions you wanted to add or anything?
Yeah. I had a question, actually. John, your games, are they porn or art?
Some of them are both. Right? Some of them are. I try very, very hard to. I'm a big fan of subversive literature. I love Hunter Thompson. I love Chuck Palahniuk. I love the Beat Poets. I love Philip K. Dick. I'm a huge fan of Harlan Ellison. If you look at my shelf, I got a bunch of Harlan Ellison books. I'm a big fan of subversive literature, and I try my best to make every game I write have at least one subversive element in it. The game I did that comes closest to pornography, I think, is Wicked Fantasy, which is a supplement for Pathfinder. And I did it specifically because I wanted to write a game about racism. And that's what Wicked Fantasy is. It's a game about racism. And I did it under the guise of a Pathfinder supplement.
Wow.
And so if you read Wicked Fantasy, it's got elves, it's got dwarves, it's got, halflings, it's got all that kind of stuff. But it's also got real problems in it, in that world. And they are all based on the fact that none of the races trust each other because, racism. So anyway, I think that's the game that came closest to porn. Although I did do a game called Sexcraft.
Yeah.
Which is a little 10-page, it's a meta game. It's not even a standalone role-playing game. You could play it as a standalone role-playing game. But the point of it is to use the magic system and put it on top of your favorite role-playing game. And I wrote it as a game that said, what if I made a game where sex was the resolution mechanic rather than violence? Mm-hmm. And that's what Sexcraft is. And then I expanded that out to a game called Galaxy XXX, which is a sex space opera role-playing game, which does the same thing. Sex is one of the stats. It's how good you are at it. And you can use it as a thing to resolve problems rather than violence. As a matter of fact, there really isn't a way to resolve things with violence in the game. And that's a game that'll be coming out next year. So yeah, I made a porn game that's art.
Excellent.
Cool. All right. So final round, a couple quick fire questions. Sure. As I said, the podcast is about my different interests, and it's the ice cream for everyone. The one. Do you like ice cream?
I love ice cream.
Any favorite flavors?
Yes, chocolate chip mint.
Chocolate chip mint.
Yes, there is a particular kind of chocolate chip mint that I'm a really big fan of, which is the Ben & Jerry's has a mint chocolate chunk, which is divine.
Yeah.
It's just so good.
How about beer?
I am not a fan of beer.
Okay.
Because it tastes like beer.
Yeah, but that's absolutely fine.
Hold on a second.
Yeah, sure.
Here. I should have been eating this while we were talking.
So do you want to say, for the people not having the video?
I am eating Talenti Gelato Mediterranean Mint.
Mediterranean Mint.
Yes.
Very nice. It's superior to the other kinds of mint.
Vastly superior.
How about travel and the favorite place that you've ever traveled to, or your favorite trip?
I went to Ireland.
Ooh.
I have Irish in my family, and when I went to Ireland, Everyone treated me like a cousin.
Yeah.
People who didn't even know who I was. It was so friendly there. Yeah. And so I had family from County Cork.
Cool.
And the convention was about 200 people, right? It's a small convention. But like a dozen people showed up from County Cork who learned that I had family there.
Wow.
Just because they learned that I had family there, and they showed up just to say, welcome to Ireland, blah, 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 blah. And I had a lot of fun at the convention. And then after the after hours, I also had a lot of fun, which I probably can't talk about. But I did get to piss on a church.
Okay, that's good fun.
Yes, it was. I should tell this story. So we're walking back to my bed and breakfast, right?
Okay.
And I can't remember what it is because the Irish have gotten me so drunk.
They tend to do that sometimes. It's cliche. It's cliche, but it happens.
They got me so drunk. Back up really quick. So I was told that the proper way to drink whiskey is that you set it on fire, and then you put it out with a coaster, and then you drink it and sniff the fumes.
Yes. And
I went, this sounds incredibly dangerous. So I did that. I'm an American, and I don't drink that much at all. I have an occasional, like on my birthday, I'll have like a little bit of mead or something like, because I love mead. So I drink this and I do it, and suddenly I can't feel my tongue. My tongue, and I can't feel my fingertips. And I said, I can't feel my tongue. I said this out loud. And there goes guy goes, oh yeah, that's the absinthe I put in it.
Oh my God.
You bastard. So I'm going home. I'm trying to find, and I have this like little crew of people that's hanging out with me. And we're trying to find my bed and breakfast, and we can't find it. And we're asking people. I know what it's called, and even the taxi cab drivers don't know where it is. And suddenly I really, 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 really have to take a piss. I really do. It's like my whole abdomen is burning. I have to pee so bad. And I turned to my buddy and I'm like, I gotta pee. And he's like, well, let's go jump behind that building over there. And I'm like, okay, because it's 3 a.m. and nothing is open. So we jump behind the building and we're doing what we're supposed to do. And I realize we're pissing on a church. And I turn to my guy and say, we're pissing on a church. And he's like, yeah. And I went, I'm in Ireland. I'm cold drunk and I'm pissing on a church.
Oh my God. Isn't it funny how it's great to hear the story about travel, and I've traveled a bit, and I love discovering new places and going to new places, but ultimately the stories we've got most of the time revolve around the people we meet and the experiences we have with them, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Never been to France.
Well, you will have a lot of people welcoming you over there if you do. I think your games are very popular, and
yes, they are.
Yeah.
Well, I got to get to France because we're doing 7th Sea.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. What's the timeline, by the way, on 7th Sea? What are you thinking for the project?
I would really, really like for 7th Sea, the director's cut, the new role-playing game, to be out for Gen Con of next year.
Right.
The Kickstarter, I would really, really like to start in January.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see what happens.
Got it.
But we're doing I have a friend here who is French, and his family's from French, and he learned how to read English by reading the L5R role-playing game.
Oh, what's his name?
His name is Fabian.
No, that's not the one I know. Yeah, I know someone near you. So
yeah, yeah, and he's an incredible person. I love Fabian to death, and he's kind of like because when we did 7th Sea, I was very conscious about getting things right. There's a couple of things we screwed up on. We screwed up on Castile completely. Just screwed it up. But I was really, really, because there's a whole anti-France bullshit thing in America that's really just stupid. And we really have to do France right. And so whenever I do stuff, like I'm doing all the pre-design work, and I show it to Fabian, and I go, is this right? And he's like, well, this part isn't right, but this part is right. And I'm like, good. Okay, we'll fix this part. And because I'm very proud of being an American. I mean, there's crappy things that our country has done, really crappy things. But there's also some awesome stuff that we've done, and I think you have to own all of it, right? You have to be like, look, we did this crappy thing, and it was really crappy, and yes, it's crappy. We know, we do. We apologize, we did it, and as opposed to American exceptionalism, which is we never do anything crappy, which is bullshit. But on the other hand, I think that, like you said in travel, it's when you travel to a country and you get to meet the people, right? The people are the country, right? And when you travel to America, you get, it's almost like we're 5 different countries.
At least more than 5. There's usually a difference between states. Actually, we were talking about that in an episode with Julien and I was talking with Xavier. Xavier, who's another person who contributes to the podcast. He was saying that he was, in his experience, he was saying that Europe, even though we're different countries, different languages, and so on the surface seem very different, when you're into it, actually, they're very close. There's some kind of old world feel that is something similar. Whereas the United States from afar, it seems like we really know exactly what's going on because most of our movie, a lot of our food comes from there. But when you arrive in the States and you go from state to state, you start realizing there's huge differences from different regions. And, there's at least 5, as you said, or maybe more countries it's a vast territory. So, yeah.
Yeah. I'm eating ice cream.
Yes.
So I dated a girl once who had family from Boston, and their grandmother came out to visit California, and she said, the problem with California is that you have no law and order in the country. And I was like, what? No what? You have no law and order. What is that? And I eventually figured out she was saying law and order, right? But the R in order had migrated over to the law, so it was law and order. So I got no law and order. I was like, oh wow.
Yes.
But yeah, it is. We're this big mess. Is really the problem. We're this big mess. But so anyway, getting back to the thing is that I really, really, really want someone who is French to read 7th Sea, and someone who is Spanish, and someone who's Irish, and everything. And go, yeah, they didn't just make us caricatures. They really tried, their best to capture what, at the very least, what is awesome about us.
Yeah.
Right. And, and for France, a big thing of it that we tried to do and that we're going to do even more of in the new edition is really capture the sense of camaraderie and the sense of solidarity and the sense of that whole national sense of pride has a lot of negative connotations, but I think that there's a real beauty in the national pride of France that I think that is easy to capture and is something that's really noteworthy and something really neat. And we're gonna so for example. There is an advantage that only the Montaigne can have, called camaraderie, and we spelled it in the French way. And and in the game you can spend hero points, and when you spend a hero point, you get 3 bonus dice for it, right? But if you're from Montaigne, which I probably mispronounced horribly, Montaigne. If you're from there. If you pick a number of fellows that you have, which are probably the other player characters.
Yeah.
And when you spend a hero point for an action that helps them, you get 4 dice instead of 3.
That's cool.
Because that feels right.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, it feels right, and it's definitely the 3 Musketeers.
Yeah.
That's
which is the greatest book ever written.
Yes, exactly.
Of course.
I love Dumas. I have read all of his books.
Yeah.
Even the bad ones. And I love all of them. They're so good. And so, and again, it was like one of the goals for 7th Sea was, would this happen in a Dumas novel?
Yeah.
Would this be in a Dumas novel? And if the answer is no, then it doesn't belong in the game.
Yeah.
And one of the other elements of it was, I'm talking a lot, but one of the other elements of it was, like in the first edition 7th Sea, a lot of the sorcery was you have to concentrate and you can't do anything else.
Yes.
Right. And I was talking with Mike Curry, who's one of the lead designers on the project, and I just asked this question. I was like, could I use Porte during a sword fight? And Porte is the magic where you literally rip holes, bleeding, screaming holes in reality, and reach through and grab stuff. And before, in the original game, it's like you have to concentrate and you can't do anything else and you can be interrupted. And I was like, could you do Porte during a sword fight? And Mike said, could Errol Flynn do it? And I went, yeah. And he said, then yes.
Yes. I definitely included it in games that I've ran.
Yeah. Then yes. It's like, can you use fate magic during a duel? But while you're fighting? Yes. Of course you can. Why wouldn't you be able to do that? And then that one little question changed like how we looked at all the sorcery. And so, it's like, would it happen in a Dumas novel? Yes. Then it goes in the game.
Yeah.
That's the measuring stick.
Yeah. Cool. All right. I think we're coming to the end of this. Thank you very, very much, John. It's been really fascinating and pretty awesome talking to you. It's been great to hear more about everything the way that you think about gaming and the way that you think about stories and the way that you write them. It's been a pleasure. So we'll be looking forward. Yeah, it's been fun. We'll be definitely looking forward to the Kickstarter for 7C. Is there anything else that you have projects like on the go at the moment before that, or that's the main one you're working on?
That's what our focus is. We were going to be doing Galaxy XXX, and then this 7C thing happened.
Okay.
And we're kind of like, I don't want to put off Galaxy XXX, but so also we ran into a problem with our artist. We wanted to have one artist do all the art.
Okay.
And he was only able to do the cover.
Right.
And we're like, oh, we love you so much, and we want you to do all the art. And he's like, I can't. And so that kind of stymied us for a moment. And that stymied us long enough that 7C popped up.
Yeah.
And then everything changed. So.
Got it. Well, we'll be looking forward to that. And so hopefully for Kickstarter in January or early 2016 anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Oh, yeah.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
I think we'll just leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely.
Thank you for being there.
Well, that was our second episode of the Ice Cream for Everyone podcast. I really hope you enjoyed listening to it. There's more interviews and more episodes coming up very, very soon. In the meantime, you can follow our blog and check out the weekly Ice Cream Sunday email newsletter that you can sign up on the website at icecreamforeveryone.net. That's all spelled out, icecreamforeveryone.net. And if you need any advice, branding, marketing, strategy, whatever else, or if you just have a question about the podcast, about who I am, what I'm writing, just don't hesitate sending a message. All my details are up on the website on icecreamforeveryone.net. And if you enjoyed it, just share it with a friend, basically. I'd love for more people to hear about this. And if you have an idea or if you'd like to be interviewed by me for the podcast, and if you think that it's relevant to it, just get in touch as well. I'd love to hear from you. All right, cheers. Bye.